day, people. So we'll be discussing today chapter one, the problem and its background. So I know that you have already seen this PowerPoint presentation in our LMS platform, but I hope that you would still find time to watch this video because somehow this would be helpful for you to be able to craft your chapter one. So, why are we writing chapter one? I mean, as grade 12 students, this is not new to you anymore because you have been to practical research one, as I have mentioned during our face-to-face discussions that practical research one and two are almost identical. The only difference is that the other one, in practical research one, what you have focused on is a qualitative research, and of course, here in practical research two, what we will be focusing on or will be working on is a quantitative research. And I mean, we already had our title proposals, and your titles are already approved, and that's what are we going to work on. And probably this is not, the the way that we expect this to happen, but that's what it is. So let's go to the discussion. So, chapter one is titled The Problem and Its Background. So, by the title itself, we can already see that our purpose in writing our first chapter research is to prove the relevance and timeliness of our study, meaning it has to be clear in your mind that the very reason why you are writing your chapter one is to prove that your problem, the research problem that you want to work on, is still worth studying. As I have mentioned when we are discussing lesson four, we have a lot of problems rather, and we cannot list everything down. I mean, the list can go on and on when we talk about problem, but what of those what among those problems are research worthy, right? So in chapter one, our main purpose is to prove that the research problem that we have chosen and you have proposed and we have approved is still relevant and timely as of the moment. Okay, so in this lesson, we'll be uh, discussing the common parts of chapter one. What can we find in chapter one, and how do we write them? Okay, so these are the common parts of chapter one. First, of course, is the introduction. So the introduction part has the same style or format as the related review of related literature. Okay, we have sources, references, and authors are cited. However, one thing that we want to emphasize is the introduction is much shorter and more focused and straight to the point in the way that it justifies the relevance and timeliness of your study. Yes, it is like an RRL because technically speaking, you have to get your sources. Remember, the purpose of writing chapter 1 is to prove that your problem is relevant, is timely, and it is really needed to be studied. So, common sense, we have to have sources. Understood? We have to have sources because, as we know, if we are working on a research, we cannot just put on information and data and details that are not based on a reliable source. We cannot put our opinion on it. So, technically speaking, we have to have sources. We have to review other studies. Okay? So, you don't have to worry about this because you have already written some sort of an introduction when you have prepared your title proposal, of course, because you cannot propose a problem without studying it, right? Without looking for sources. Now, one thing that you have to remember is this one is straightforward. This one is direct to the point. and focused on proving why your problem is still research worthy now. It's still relevant as of the moment. Why is it still requiring for a study? So how do we write our introduction? First, you have to introduce your topic, or technically the theme of your research, in a single paragraph. For example, if you want to work on sleep deprivation of students, you have to first introduce what sleep deprivation is, or the central theme of your study. What is the broad topic that covers your variables, or the problem that you want to study? So you have to write that in a single paragraph. And then after that, paragraph number 2 would be about your problem in general. Okay, for example, again, uh, your problem is sleep deprivation. So if you have already introduced what sleep deprivation is, or another variable is academic performance and things like that, so you have to introduce your problem in general. You have to cite supporting statements that prove your existence, or the existence of your problem. So this is where you have to have your sources. Okay, this is where you have to look back at the reviews that you have made, literary reviews that you have made prior to writing your problem, or to writing your introduction. Okay, so this is where you are going to start introducing your specific problem. Okay, the first paragraph would be the general theme of your study. What would be the general focus of your study? The second paragraph would be the problem in general. And the third paragraph is the problem in your local area. How does that problem affect you or your respondents in the third paragraph? So for or in the next paragraph, because your second paragraph would have to compose two to three. So fourth, second to fourth paragraph, fifth paragraph rather, will talk about your problem in general. And as you see, this has the longer part compared to the uh other parts of the introduction, because this is where you have to cite supporting statements. Okay, and after you have already established your sources, establish the background, and that's why it's called problem in its background, right? You have to introduce your topic, your problem, and the background, how does this problem exist from other based on other studies. And then next to that would be the problem in your local area. How does your respondents, target respondents, your people, you yourself as a researcher, experience that problem, using 1 to 2 paragraphs. So at this point, your introduction already would have 7 paragraphs. Okay? After that, of course, you have already established your problem. Again, our purpose here is to go straight to the point. So if we have already established the problem, the next paragraph would be your course of action. What do you plan to do? So this is where you are going to somehow give a bird's eye view, or an overview of a research design, or of a kind of a study that you want to pursue, whether it is a quantitative, of course it is a quantitative research, or what kind in particular of a quantitative research. Is it evaluation, is it correlation, or the like? So this is where you are going to write it down. And the last paragraph for your introduction would be restating the relevance and timeliness of your study. So it's like a circular type of essay, or a write-up, because you are going to end how you started it. Okay? You introduce the problem in the beginning, the theme and the problem, the general theme of your study. Then you are going to end on restating. Why is it relevant? Why is it timely? Why do we have to pursue it? Okay, so that's when your introduction ends. So technically speaking, by counting the paragraphs, less than 10 paragraphs would do for an introduction. So 1 to 2 pages in maximum. Okay, so that would be the first part, the introduction. The next to that would be the very heart of your study, which is our SOP, or the statement of the problem. So, as I have mentioned, this is the heart of your paper. This is where everything comes from, and this is where everything would end. It's the heart of our paper, is refers to the questions. Right? When we talk about statement of the problem, these are the questions that we want to answer in our research. And it simply defines and describes the research questions along with the broad method that will be used to solve the problem. And as the heart, it sets the stage for the other parts of the study. So from here, the other parts of the study from chapter 1, the following sections, to chapter 5, this is where we are going to base the details. Again, this is the very heart of your research, and this is like the starting point and also the ending point. As we have said, this is the one that sets the stage for chapters 2 and following. Okay, and in writing your SOP, you have to consider two parts according to Cristobal and Cristobal. In the year 2017, there are two particular parts of a research statement of the problem, rather research SOP. So one is the general problem, two is the specific problem. So let's dive in. The general problem are sentences that serves as the opening of the SOP. It states the main research problem or the core issue of your study. So this is in a declarative sentence, not in questions, because the one written in questions are the specific problem. So technically, you have already written it, right? These are uh the part where you are going to introduce your main problem. So the general problem technically is based on your title, right? This study aims to describe if it is descriptive or check the correlation between the variables that you have in your study. So you have just to write it in declarative sentence, meaning it's not a question. Okay, then after that will be the specific problem, also known as the research question. So these are the questions which the research aims to answer. So these are your, for example, demographic profile and everything. Okay, so these are the questions that you want to answer specifically through the data analysis and studies conclusion. So, how are you going to write your SOP? First, you have to get your research title. Again, because that will be the basis of your general problem. You have to identify the main research problem or issue which you had already identified in your introduction, right? You have already introduced or yeah, introduced your general problem, so you just have to check it, and then you have to formulate your general problem in sentence form, but you have already on your document upon your title proposal is somehow already right, because again, this is just a review of chapter 1 in practical research 1. The only difference is that the format of questions are now different than it was before, because when you are working with your practical research one, the kind of questions that you use there are open-ended, just like what we have discussed before, right? Open-ended questions are for practical research one, and in practical research two, the kind of questions that we use here are structured questions, or what we call close-ended ones. So this is not actually new to you. So after you formulate a general problem, you're not going to formulate your specific problem or the actual questions that you want to answer in chapters 3 and 4 and 5 also. So the specific questions must be about demographic profiles of your respondents, and it's optional. Why? Because if it would not be used in the data analysis, there's no need for it. If you don't need the gender, don't include it. If you don't need the section, don't include it. I mean, if demographic profile would not matter if you would not use it uh in your data analysis in chapter 4 in presentation of data. If you're not going to correlate it, like for example, your results would not be grouped by gender. Do not include gender anymore because it would not help. It would just occupy space on your paper and it would not serve any purpose. So that's why it's optional. So if you don't have your demographic profile or details about your respondents, you go directly to questions about your independent variable, or if you're not working on a correlational type of study, you have to first make a specific question about variable number one, okay, or the thing that you want to study. And then second is about your dependent variable. Then the fourth question would be connection between your IVDV or the actual result that you want to get on your study. Don't worry, I'll be helping you with it. It's just that your papers or the hard copies of your papers are in the school right now. So we'll be working on it together. And another optional part of an SOP is what we call a course of action, or what do you plan to do after or with the findings that you will be finding out at the end of your research. So that's our, technically speaking, a minimum number of questions that you may have in your study or in your SOPs. Three, okay, 3 to 5 questions only, because the more questions that you have, the longer would be your paper. Okay, because there would be a lot of data that you have to analyze and collect. Now, few things that you have to remember when you're writing your SOP are the following. First, your research question must be contextualized. It must be based on your situation. Of course, it is your study, so it must be based on your problem. What do you want to really study? It must be focused on the goal, right? On the problem that you want to address, and specific and direct to the point, and of course, must be relevant to your topic or your problem, because if it is not, then it should not be included in your paper. Okay? So that's for SOP. Following SOP would be the significance of the problem. Now, people, we don't have to complicate things out here. The very reason why our subject is titled Practical Research is because the things here are actually self-explanatory. So when we talk about significance, we talk about importance, benefits. Okay, so in this part of your research, I know you know it, that this is where we list down who would benefit from our study and how would they benefit from it. So, as it reads, significance of the study identifies the beneficiaries of your study and states how they will benefit from your study when the problems are solved. In short, this presents the contribution of your study. 1 to 2 sentences on how each beneficiaries will benefit from your study. So you don't have to make an essay about it, like how each beneficiary would benefit from your study, or yeah, would benefit from your study. 1 to 2 sentences would do. So when we talk about sequence, okay, the sequence of the beneficiaries of the research starts from the most benefited to the least one. The benefits must be specific and arranged according to the degree of significance. So according to the degree of significance, understood? According to the degree of significance. So you are going to list down the very first people who would be most benefited for this study, okay? Who would benefit the most in the study. So if it is the students, be it. If it is the teachers, be it. Whoever they are. Now, if you are writing your SOS, you have to, or your significance of the study, you have to do the following. First, you have to refer to your problem statement or your SOP. Why? Because, as I have said, your SOP sets the stage for the other parts of the research, right? When you do this, you can clearly define the contribution of your study. Remember that you are working on the significance, technically talking about the contribution benefit of your study. So, If you would not check on your problem statement, it would not be clear on the end of your readers and your respondents and the future researchers who would use your study as well. What would be the purpose or the benefit of your study? So when you refer to your problem statement or your SOP, you can clearly define the benefit or contribution of your study. So the first question that you have to ask to yourself, to your mind, what are the benefits or advantages of my study based on our SOP? Okay. And then second, you have to decide the format and the style. So as I have mentioned a while ago, the arrangement must be according to who would benefit it the most. However, there are some research that changes the style of of their SOS. So we have to decide on the format. Are we gonna use paragraph form? Meaning it's like uh beneficiary number one would be having the first paragraph and then a second paragraph and the like. Okay. If it is enumerated, then we would present them in bullet form. Okay. And in the style, in the arrangement, could be hierarchical, ibig sabihin according to their rank. Okay, according to their rank. For example, common common beneficiaries in the studies made by grade 12 researchers are students, teachers, parents, school administrators, and government I'm blocking out departments of the government rather. Okay, so with those five, when we talk about hierarchical style, we talk about their ranks. Who would go first? So sometimes who comes first in hierarchical are, for example, DepEd. It's hard to write here. Okay, if hierarchical, meaning if we are going to include DepEd, like for example, our set of beneficiaries would be students, teachers, parents, DepEd, school administrators, those five. If this hierarchical would go first would be the one highest in rank, which is of course the DepEd, followed by the school administrators, followed by either teacher or parents, and then the last would be the students. Okay, or let's have number six, future researchers. They would be the last ones. Because when it comes to the ranking, they will be considered as the one in the lowest rank. However, if it is according to importance, the arrangement may change. Okay? For example, we still have the same set of beneficiaries, DepEd, teachers, parents, students, future researchers. In your kind of study, of course, because you are student researchers, particularly, your respondents would be the students, right? So who would benefit the most? The students in the topics that you have proposed. The students, right? So, and according to importance style, that would be the first one. So at this point of time, I want us to agree that what we are going to use in format or style is enumerated in according to importance. So we're not going to use paragraph form and hierarchical. So we're going to use the common usual style of SOS enumerated form. We're going to have bullets, or we're going to enumerate who would be your uh, beneficiaries, and the arrangement would be according to importance, not according to rank or not hierarchical. Okay, so these are some definitions according to their authority or position, just like what I've mentioned. And according to benefit or importance would be according to who will benefit the most in the study. So another reminder after you decide on a format is you have to make sure that you have to be specific and you have to make it short and simple. Okay, because again, you're just going to simply go direct to the point that, of course, these are the people who would benefit from our study. Okay, short and simple, specifically. So after significance of the study, we have scope and delimitation. So If I would tell myself, these are what sets boundaries of your research. And also, this should be your favorite part during the defense because this would serve as your shield against the loopholes. Right? If your panelists would ask you, why only this, why only that, why only STEM people, why only ABM students, why only grade 12 students? Your answers should not be complicated. You should just simply answer because, as we stated, in the scope and the limitation and blah blah blah. So this gives us the boundaries, what we only cover in our research. So it specifies what is covered in terms of concept, number of subjects, or population included in the study, as well as the timeline when the study was conducted. So the delimitation delimits the factor. So limitation, okay? Boundaries in terms of time frame, in terms of number of subject, participants, respondents. So you have to specify which you will not deal within the study. So when we talk about limitation, we talk about what is not included. When we talk about scope, we talk about what is included. Limitation or delimitation, what is not included. Again, this should be your favorite part because this would, again, be your shield to the loopholes. Lastly, in the scope and delimitation, you are going to include the following: the what, where, when, and who. So, what? What would be the topic of investigation? The variables included. Where? The venue of the setting of the research. When? The time frame by which the study was conducted, and of course the who, the population. Now, yeah, that will be the chapter one of the scope and delimitation. And others may have their hypothesis, I think, in chapter one if they are working uh on a correlational type of research with IVDB. So hypotheses are just guesses. So uh uh, intellectual guesses. Like for example, again, as we have studied from lesson one, the future outcomes of a qualitative research is somehow predictable because not because it's not research worthy anymore, but because this is not about finding information. Objective type of research is not about finding or exploring new things or new information, new data, but proving how factual that data is. So when we talk about scope and I mean, not scope and delimitation, hypothesis, we are technically guessing the general answer. Like for example, if it is correlational, then its hypothesis, the null hypothesis would be there is no significant relationship between the variables. You just have to specify the variables that you have used in your study. Or hypothesis number, alternative hypothesis or H1 would be there is a significant relationship between your studies. So technically speaking, that would somehow answer your third question on your SOP, third or fourth question on your SOP if you would take a look at it. So that would be all for today. Now, I would love to have your chapter ones passed already as soon as possible. So somehow, even if we are not physically seeing each other, we can still have the checking and the like. So if you have queries and questions, the leaders or assistant leaders may ask me or may have me send their queries to our group chat or via personal message in messages. So that will be all for today. I hope that you are all doing good and safe. Stay safe, CCIans, and that will be all for today. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye.